Imagine walking into a hospital with a sick child, only to be told, sorry, we won't treat you because you didn't follow our advice. It sounds like a dystopian nightmare, yet this is the disturbing reality behind a growing comply or die mindset in healthcare. A listener of this show, Shauna, she's a nurse, and she recently reached out to me with a very chilling observations she's seeing happen firsthand. More and more medical professionals are openly endorsing discrimination against patients who hold different beliefs or who don't comply with certain medical recommendations. In a profession that once prided itself on neutrality and caring for all, some now suggest that those who disagree with prevailing views or decline a recommended treatment simply don't deserve care. And Shauna, in her message, put it to me bluntly, it's a effing scary time to be a conservative in medicine or even be a patient. Shauna shared her example from her own experience. Her former manager posting openly on social media, essentially that if an unvaccinated child were to fall ill with something like measles, that child shouldn't be allowed to receive medical care. I mean, let that sink in. A healthcare professional advocating that a sick child be denied from getting a vaccine. Shauna was rightfully horrified, and she asked, should we also refuse to treat diabetics who don't follow their diet, or lung cancer patients who kept smoking, or alcoholics with liver failure who didn't stop drinking? See, where does this comply or die mentality end? And today, we're going to tackle this issue head on. We're going to highlight the very real concerns and the pain behind this terrifying trend. We're going to lay out data and examples that make our case, call out the blatant hypocrisy and the BS in this approach, and then we're going to explore how we can fix this and restore sanity and compassion to the medicine. And by the end of this episode, you're going to see why this trend is so dangerous, not just for the conservative folk or the unvaccinated folk, but for anyone who values ethical, trustworthy healthcare in this post-truth world. So let's go ahead, pull back the curtain and see what's been creeping in healthcare and what we can do about it. So let's start with first principles. For centuries, the ethos of medicine has been quite simple. Take care of the patient in front of you. And doctors swear oaths not to do harm and to treat the sick without bias or prejudice. Nurses pledge to advocate for all under their care. The idea is that everyone deserves care, whether saint or sinner, whether their illness was unavoidable or an entirely self-inflicted one. A core part of medical ethics is neutrality, treating a patient's medical need, not passing judgment on their personal choices. The American Medical Association's Code of Medical Ethics makes this crystal clear. It explicitly bars physicians from refusing care to patients based on solely the patient's infectious disease status or any reason that amounts to discrimination against a class of patients. In other words, a doctor should not turn someone away, but just because of a health choice like vaccination status. As the AMA's Director of Ethics put it, in general, no, a physician should not refuse a patient because the individual is not vaccinated or declines to be vaccinated. See, this principle isn't new. It's foundational. Think about it. We treat heavy smokers who develop lung cancer, even though smoking was a choice. We treat diabetics who can't stick to their diet and alcoholics with failing livers. And we might counsel them. We might get frustrated, but we don't kick them out of the hospital. Why? Because the job of healthcare is to heal and help, not to punish or shame. As one medical ethicist pointed out, virtually no patient is perfect, and quote, almost no one exercises enough, eats perfectly, or takes medications exactly as prescribed. We doctors don't dismiss patients for smoking or drinking too much. Why punish them for refusing the COVID-19 shot? See, that question right there captures it exactly. Because once you start deciding that this group over here, they're less deserving of care because they made a choice that you disapprove of, you're shredding the very fabric of medical ethics. And history has given us some very harsh lessons about what happens when neutrality falls apart. In the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, fear and stigma led some healthcare providers to refuse to treat AIDS patients. So people with HIV, many of them from the gay community, often faced outright discrimination in healthcare, a cruel double punishment on top of their illness. See, we look back at that now with shame and regret, and we recognize that it was wrong. Yet fast forward to today's pandemic era, and we're still seeing health status discrimination resurface, and this time aimed at those labeled unvaccinated or otherwise considered non-compliant. See, the forms may differ, but the underlying issue is the exact same. Prejudice in care is antithetical to everything healthcare stands for. See, given this ethical backdrop, it's so alarming to see what's been occurring because there have been multiple incidents of doctors and clinics refusing to treat patients who aren't vaccinated against COVID-19 or who haven't, quote, followed the rules. In Florida and Alabama, which, surprising for example, at least 2 physicians have made headlines for telling patients that they would no longer accept unvaccinated individuals in their practice. One of them, an Alabama physician named Dr. Jason Valentine, got so frustrated with unvaccinated patients that he posted a sign on his office door and on Facebook stating that, quote, he will not see patients who are unvaccinated as of a certain date. His reasoning, he said he cannot continue to watch his patients suffer and die from an entirely preventable disease, saying COVID is a miserable way to die and I can't watch them die like that. And you can hear the anguish in his words, right? Okay, sure. And if anyone who empathizes with the doctor and thinks he's being 100% serious, God bless. But let's unpack this. A doctor is effectively firing all patients who won't get the COVID shot. He's not the only one, by the way. Physicians like in other places, I mentioned Florida, but also the District of Columbia, Toronto, etc. They have similarly dismissed unvaccinated patients from their care. And it went beyond individual offices too. In Texas, of all states, an advisory task force actually considered a policy to reserve ICU beds only for vaccinated patients. Think about that. If there's 1 ICU bed left and 2 patients needed, the vaccinated one is going to get priority by policy. By policy, not just by medical need. See, that idea didn't become law, but the fact that it was even on the table shows how far this thinking has actually spread. And this was in Texas, guys. And it's not just COVID, by the way, for the vaccination statuses to matter. The entire attitude is spilling over. In Shauna's example, the measles post, right? Perfect case. A healthcare manager suggesting an unvaccinated child with measles be denied care as a punishment to the parents. See, that is just absolutely horrifying. Comply with vaccination guidelines or your kid doesn't get treatment. Let them suffer. Especially if you're not a parent here, but like if that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what will. Because where do we draw the line? Should an ER doctor check to see if you voted a certain way before deciding to stop your bleeding? Of course not. It sounds insane, and it is, yet here we are living in a time where respected healthcare professionals are publicly and openly cheering the idea of withholding care from those who don't comply. Like what Shauna said, it's effing crazy. Just this idea of comply or die. And by the way, we've also seen a wave of public shaming and a lack for compassion for certain patients. Think back during the height of COVID. There was dozens, hundreds probably of op-eds and social media posts essentially saying, I'm out of sympathy for the unvaccinated. If they get sick, it's their own fault. That's like Jimmy Kimmel, the R.I.P. Wheezy. But then doctors, one doctor writing in the Los Angeles Times, quote, I'm running out of compassion for the unvaccinated. I'm running out of compassion. Basically admitting that her empathy was drying up for patients who made a choice that she just disagreed with on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm sure you all saw many of the posts, right? Sometimes even from healthcare professionals like your friends who were nurses or doctors expressing glee when an outspoken vaccine critic got very sick or they died. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Like that sentiment, they had it coming, right? They had it coming. That they probably felt it was satisfying, right? But think of how toxic that is as healthcare professionals to the spirit of healthcare. When a person is sick and suffering, a supposed compassionate medical professional is not supposed to ask, well, did you deserve this? No, you just help. You just help, period. And if we lose that, we're losing the very basics of humanity in medicine. Like, and listen, I get it. My father-in-law has voiced this concern to me. Like, Brian, we went through years, months really of insane COVID issues. But I mean, it was months and up to a year plus of battling the pandemic. They saw death after death, and many of which they argue could have been prevented, whether it was the manner in which vaccines were being administered. I'm a little out on that. But listen, frontline workers, I get it, understandably exhausted, emotionally raw. The number of folks you saw pass, I get it, right? But like, there was a bioethicist who described how behind closed doors there were healthcare providers who were saying that the anti-vaxxers, can we punish them? Can we charge them higher insurance premiums? Can we withhold scarce medications? Or can we just outright refuse treatment? See, that idea, it gained traction in a lot of the healthcare circles. Why not make the non-compliant pay more? Why don't we make them wait to the back of the line, right? And the emotional logic was, we sacrifice so much and you won't even do the bare minimum. So why should we keep caring for you? That was the mentality. And listen, for those doctors who, the emotional side of things, the moral distress side of things, I get it. Again, my father-in-law has voiced that to me himself. And in fact, there's research on the clinicians' moral distress in treating unvaccinated patients, where providers felt torn between their duty to care and their anger at patients who refused measures that would have, in their thought process at the time, protected themselves and others. And this has been what's led to what they call compassion fatigue, where caregivers are apparently just running out of empathy after being pushed to the brink. Even The Guardian, I say even The Guardian, but The Guardian reported on nurses and doctors, quote, succumbing to compassion fatigue when treating unvaccinated COVID patients, meaning that their sympathy had just run dry. So when's the last time you really thought about your heart health? No, not after just a bad checkup or after seeing a loved one go through something scary, but really thought about it. And the reality is most people don't until it's too late. We chalk it up to fatigue, brain fog, or, just high blood pressure, or hey, maybe we're just getting older, or it's that dreaded stress. But the root cause might be something deeper. Your body's production of nitric oxide dropping off. That one molecule plays a critical role in keeping your arteries open, your blood pressure normal, and your cells oxygenated. And without enough of it, you're not performing at the best mentally or physically. And that's why I've been taking Cardio Miracle for 2 years now. It's a nitric oxide powerhouse packed with over 50 ingredients like organic beetroot, L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3 that are all clinically proven to help support circulation, reduce inflammation, and supercharge your energy levels. It's not just heart support, it's whole body support. So if you're tired of feeling off, give your heart and your health the boost it needs. Just click the link in the show notes or scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to start your journey today. Discount already applied. Just look for the note, "You're shopping with Brian Nichols" at checkout. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. And again, I hear the argument from the frontline folks who they went through hell. I get it. They're human. But, and this is a huge but, acting on that fatigue and that frustration by just actually discriminating against patients, that is horrific. It's not only ethically wrong, it's backwards. Refusing care or turning people away, it doesn't make those people just magically vanish. It's just shifting the burden elsewhere. And often it's going to make things worse. Because think about this. One doctor refusing to see an unvaccinated patient doesn't mean that person never gets sick. It means when they do get really, 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 really sick, they show up in an ER or an urgent care. Often they are worse off than they would have been if they had had early treatment. I think it was Dr. Lydia Dugdale, I think it was. She wrote, "Patients dismissed by one clinician may not find another. Many will eventually wind up in the hospital, which can only worsen staffing and supply shortages." See, doctors who seek to punish end up punishing their own colleagues. So in other words, the strain just gets pushed down the line, making the overall system even more stressed. And ultimately, someone will treat the patient, likely in a crisis scenario, incurring higher risks and higher costs than necessary. So let's call this mindset what it is. It's a punitive philosophy that contradicts the very purpose of healthcare. Comply or die thinking says that if you don't obey whatever the current recommendation is, whether it's to get this vaccine, take this treatment, follow this health policy, get this lobotomy, then you are less worthy of compassion and care. It effectively weaponizes medical care as leverage to enforce conformity. See, that is dangerous. Do we really want a healthcare system where treatment is conditional on agreeing with a doctor's personal beliefs or public health edicts? See, today it might be vaccine status or mask compliance. Tomorrow, what else could it be? Political affiliation? Oh, you attended that protest? I don't like that one. Maybe I won't treat you. Lifestyle choices? You went skiing despite the risks and you broke your leg? No care for you. You should have complied with safety advice and stayed home. See, it sounds absurd, but the logic, or rather the illogic, I guess, is comply and die can spiral. Medicine has always had a bit of this paternalistic streak where doctors naturally prefer patients to follow their advice. But there's a vast difference between encouraging compliance for someone's own good and then denying care when they don't comply. See, the former is good practice. The latter is a profound betrayal of medical ethics. It turns the healer into the judge, conditioning healing on the patient's moral and behavior worthiness. See, that approach belongs in yesteryear, not a modern hospital. And in an ethicist writing in Psychology Today, he nailed it. They said, denying care to the unvaccinated violates the ethical principle of treating all patients justly, regardless of their complicity in becoming sick. We doctors don't dismiss patients for smoking or drinking too much. Why punish them for refusing the COVID-19 shot? And I just want to highlight that word, justly. Justice in healthcare means fairness. It means impartiality. You treat the patient in need, period, without injecting your personal biases. Another aspect of why this is dangerous, by the way, is that it intensifies social polarization, right? Because we live in this era where there's deep divides, left versus right. You're pro this, you're anti that. If our hospitals and clinics become battlegrounds on the culture war front, where does that leave us, truly? Like, there was one researcher who found that people who perceive high levels of partisan polarization, they have higher risks of depression and anxiety. And the last thing we need is our doctors and nurses contributing to feeling that our society is split into this good, compliant people, and then there's the bad, non-compliant people. Like, healthcare should be, above all things, like the one place where you're just having basic humanity is good enough to get you care. Like, no matter who you voted for, what mistakes you made, like when physicians publicly declare partisan blame, like, by the way, the governor of Alabama last year saying it's time to start blaming unvaccinated folks, and not Sarah Huckabee, I guess it was a few years ago, saying, I forget who it was. She said it was time to start blaming the unvaccinated folk because they're letting us down, right? Like, that adds fuel to the fire. And it may be emotionally satisfying for some, but like ultimately this just drives distrust and animosity. And this leads us to, I think, one of the most critical points that we need to just talk about, elephant in the room, and that is trust or the lack thereof right now in our current medical system. Trust is the lifeblood of the patient-doctor relationship. And if patients believe their doctors see them as others, as one of those people, right? Who they don't deserve the full effort or compassion. How on earth can we have trust survive in medical healthcare? There was a recent Gallup poll, and it just blew my mind when I saw this. For the first time ever now, Democrats express more trust in their personal doctors than Republicans do. Historically, that wasn't the case. In 2010, 73% of Republicans were confident in the medical advice of their doctors, which was actually higher than where Democrats were at the time. But then as of 2021, Republican confidence in doctors plummeted. It went down to 60%, while Democrats climbed to 71%. So in just one decade, We went from a slight trust advantage among right-leaning folks to a complete flip where left-leaning folks now trust their doctors far more. And see, this isn't because Republicans suddenly became anti-science Neanderthals. It's largely because they perceive that the medical establishment have become way more polarized and biased than they were before. And can you blame them? Honestly, when people see stories of doctors refusing to treat people that they just don't like the unvaccinated, or they're skeptical of mandates, or they see public health officials ridiculing their values, it will fundamentally erode trust. Like, I've talked to ordinary folks. They're not conspiracy theorists, and they're just average, everyday people who they feel now they have to second guess everything that their doctors say. In that same Gallup data, more Republicans now report that they feel they need to double check their doctor's advice or seek second opinions than ever before. See, that didn't feel this way 10 years ago. This breakdown in trust is deadly. It means, for example, that a conservative-leaning patient might ignore genuinely important medical recommendations because they suspect there might be a political agenda behind it. Think about that. It means that people delay care for whatever it may be that they have ailing, fearing that they're going to be judged or mistreated. And that means ultimately that health outcomes are going to worsen for everyone. And this is something public health officials have bemoaned. Like, why won't some groups get vaccinated or follow guidelines? Well, I wonder. Trust is a two-way street. And if folks sense just being you're holier than thou, this hostility from the medical community, they're going to tune out. Even if there are times when the medical community is absolutely speaking truths, and the comply or die attitude, it's not going to scare people into compliance. It's going to scare them away from healthcare entirely. And that helps no one. And it's not just patients that are feeling the heat. Shauna mentioned how being a conservative in the medical field these days can feel downright scary. And she's right, because we've seen I would say it's a worrying trend of this ideological intolerance within the medical profession itself. So doctors, nurses, scientists, whoever holds views that deviate from the mainstream narrative, they are ostracized, they are silenced, or they are professionally punished. And during the pandemic, this became glaringly obvious. I mean, think of highly respected physicians like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford, right? Not of some random school, from Stanford. Dr. Martin Kuldra from Harvard, right? These guys aren't quacks. They are career epidemiologists. And when they spoke up with alternative COVID-19 approaches, so for example, arguing in the Great Barrington Declaration for focused protection of the vulnerable instead of just broad generic lockdowns, the reaction from authorities, it was not to try and debate them, to show that their ideas were wrong, but to smear them, to censor them. And I'm not exaggerating. We have emails from October 2020 where the head of the NIH, it was Dr. Francis Collins, they called Bhattacharya and his colleagues 3 fringe epidemiologists. Fringe epidemiologists. And then they told Anthony Fauci that there needed to be a, quote, quick and devastating published takedown of their proposal. I mean, think about that. The top medical research official in the country didn't want to engage actual epidemiologists in discussion. He wanted to devastate and silence them. See, a concerted effort was made to paint these doctors as kooks for daring to have dissent from the comply consensus. And on the same side, think of doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Robert Malone. They were established figures in their respective fields, cardiology and vaccine technology, respectively. And they voiced concerns about vaccine safety in the official COVID-19 narrative. And listen, whether you agree with all their claims or not, what was telling was how swiftly they were cast out of the professional community. Dr. McCullough, for example, he was terminated from Baylor University's medical center, and then he later saw the board of internal medicine actually revoke his board certification because his views that didn't advocate the right things. And then think about that doctor who spent decades of building his expertise, right? Think about that. He had his credentials stripped essentially for the crime of not complying with the orthodoxy. If that's not a message to everyone else to shut up and toe the line, I mean, what is? Dr. Malone was banned from Twitter, right? Before the new management restored some of the accounts. After, what did he do? He raised alarms about vaccine risks. That was it. And numerous other physicians got branded for misinformation spreaders, just for simply what? Sharing data or treatments that went against the grain. They went against consensus. A group of activists even put together lists of these so-called dissidents and pushed state medical boards to go and discipline them. You see what's happening here, right? There is a climate of fear for anyone in medicine who does not comply with whatever the prevailing views of the day are. And we've heard the term cancel culture in academia, in media. We've seen it more recently with the Charlie Kirk conversation. Well, it hit medicine too. And it hit it hard. Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, he's a kidney specialist and former UPenn school associate dean. He spoke out against what he saw as a, quote, growing focus of radical ideology in medicine. And he paid the price. He was on the board of a major medical publication called Up to Date. And after activists labeled him a, quote, racist in a hit piece for opposing things like race-bait treatment policies, he was fired from his role. And he later said, rather than stay focused on great medicine, they bowed to cancel culture. The focus on identity politics in medicine is harming care, and it will drive away talented medical professionals. And this right here is exactly what Shauna meant by brainwashing in the colleges. And also the young professionals coming out with this almost, it's like a certain type of programming. I mean, at this point, it's irrefutable. Medical schools and institutions in recent years have indeed been injecting a lot of ideological content, sometimes at the expense, if not almost always, at the expense of open and honest debate. And many students and staff end up self-censoring because they're afraid that one wrong statement, politically wrong, not medically wrong, right, could end their career. See, that's not a healthy environment for science or for healthcare. If doctors can't question and they can't discuss freely, patients ultimately will suffer because groupthink and intimidation will crush innovation and honesty. An organization Goldfarb leads, again, called Do No Harm, put it well. Physicians are being pushed to discriminate by these new ideological mandates. Pushed to discriminate. See, that's exactly the opposite of what ethical medicine is. And Americans, by the way, are noticing this radical shift. In fact, a majority of Americans now believe that injecting divisive political ideology into the medical field is not helping healthcare at all. They reject this radical, divisive, and discriminatory ideology being pushed into medicine. So if you're a healthcare worker who holds a different view, maybe you're skeptical of some new mandate or you lean more conservative politically, you have legitimate reason to worry. And it is a scary time because the climate says comply or be cast out. And if you're a patient, well, you might wonder whether your doctor or nurse secretly despises your values and might treat you differently because you think differently than them. See, this mutual suspicion is corrosive. See, it erodes the necessary trust and the teamwork between patient and provider. I mean, how can we solve any public health challenge if one side is muttering, these idiots, they just won't obey. And then the other side is thinking, those elitists don't actually care about me as an individual? Like, we absolutely have to turn this around. And it's time to shine a bright light on the hypocrisy of the comply and die mindset and call it what it is. First off, it's blatantly inconsistent. Not that a lot of folks on the left care about being consistent, but see, traditionally the medical field has always cared for people who made bad choices. And often that's half the job. You're supposed to care for the chain smoker with COPD who's struggling to breathe. You don't say, no oxygen for you, you should have quit smoking, right? We care for the drug user who got a heart infection. We might refer them to rehab, but we still call the cardiothoracic surgeon to fix their heart valve in the meantime. We're supposed to patch up the reckless driver who smashed their car without first lecturing them on their life decisions. This is normal, by the way, and this is expected. So why suddenly draw the line at this one type of patient, the one who didn't get a particular vaccine or one who questions a particular public health measure? It's arbitrary and it's driven by emotion and politics, not by any sound principle. And if anything, one could argue that the unvaccinated COVID patient is far less culpable than some of these other examples, because they might sincerely have feared the side effects or distrusted authorities, and with understandable reasons, given the shifting of messaging we saw from public health officials. And yet, even if they were totally misinformed, so what? Medicine is full of misinformation. And the job of folks in medical care is to inform and treat, not to make moral examples of them. So when that Alabama doctor, Dr. Valentine, announced that he wouldn't see unvaccinated patients, there were some folks who applauded him, but others who rightly called him out as being a bully who violated his oath to care for all. There was one commenter in the responses who said he does not believe in his oath. And I find that hard to disagree with. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't have an asterisk that says, except for those who didn't listen to my warnings. See, it just says to do your duty as a healer. By turning away patients, he and others, they cross a line that should never have been crossed. And let's also talk about the real harm that this attitude causes. Because beyond the ethical breach and trust erosion, it can literally cost lives. If a child gets measles, perhaps their parent was hesitant about vaccines, that child still needs immediate medical attention, dehydration, fever management, and a monitoring of complications. And if we withhold care out of spite, that child could die from something treatable. And are we okay with that? I would hope every listener is shouting back at me, no. or consider the person who didn't get the COVID jab and ends up with a severe illness at home, but delays going to the hospital because they're ashamed or worried that they'll be mistreated. By the time they do arrive, they might be in a multi-organ failure beyond help. And that's not a hypothetical. I personally know of cases during the Delta wave where patients waited too long, and in part it was due to their mistrust and their fear, and the delay was fatal. Comply or die. Thinking doesn't just mean if you don't comply, we won't help you. It implicitly means that some people will take the or die part literally and avoid seeking help. If you're a small business owner with a handful of team members, but a big vision, I'm talking maybe 3, 5, maybe 10 folks tops, most phone vendors will either ignore you or try to upsell you into something bloated and expensive. Yeah, been there. But level 365, they get it. No minimum seats, no pressure to scale before you're ready. Just simple, powerful phone tools built to grow when you do. And yeah, it's still month to month, so no worries about getting locked into something that doesn't fit you next month. It's not about company size, it's about finding the right fit. That's what level 365 nails. It becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of tragedy. And we also have to call out how short-sighted this mindset is for the medical profession itself. Because if this is normalized, this kind of discrimination, a clear message is being sent to the next generation of healthcare workers that it's okay to prejudge and mistreat certain kinds of patients. Today, the out group is the unvaccinated or maybe those of a certain political stripe. Tomorrow, the target could be what? It could be different. It could be based on religion, race. Precedents matter. Once you establish that it's acceptable to refuse care based on some moral judgment of the patient, you can bet it will not stop with vaccines. Some will say, well, obesity is driving so many health costs. So if an obese patient won't lose weight, well, maybe we shouldn't do their knee replacement. Or some other draconian idea. But it's a slippery slope toward a very cold utilitarian healthcare system that I don't think any of us want to live under. Most doctors and nurses got into this field because they care about people. And they wanted to heal. They wanted to help. They want to show compassion. The system has strained them. And we see that. And we get it. The burnout is real. The pandemic trauma, it's still real. I hear this from my in-laws all the time. Nearly 1 in 5 healthcare workers left their jobs during the pandemic from the stress and the burnout. And those who remained, they have been stretched far beyond their limits. And it's natural that some might cope emotionally by just closing off or lashing out at those that they see as contributing to that strain. But to those providers, I say, please remember why you started this journey in the first place. Remember that feeling of wanting to alleviate suffering, no matter who was in front of you. If you abandon that, you're not just hurting your patients, you're hurting the profession and yourself. The greatest hazard we face is to have a generation of healthcare practitioners lose sight of that purpose. And that warning comes from Dr. Dugdale's commentary. And it rings true. If we lose our moral compass, if young doctors come up thinking it's acceptable to categorize and deny patients based on personal judgments, then healthcare as we know it will crumble. So it's time to reject this comply or die mentality. And it needs to be rejected loudly. You can be pro-vaccine and still firmly oppose denying care to the unvaccinated. You can be a liberal doctor and still happily treat a conservative patient and vice versa with full respect. In fact, you must, especially if you claim to be a professional. Anything else is a violation of public trust. And for those cheering on this discrimination from the sidelines, you be careful what you wish for, because one day you might be the one who makes a health choice outside of the mainstream, maybe a future vaccine or a future treatment, anything. And then you find yourself on the receiving end of the no care for you attitude. We have to defend the principle that every patient matters, regardless of their beliefs or actions, because that principle is our shield. It protects all of us when we are at our most vulnerable. So we've painted a pretty stark picture of the problem. Now let's talk solutions, because it's not just enough to rant, satisfying as that may be. How can we course correct the medical field and pull it back from the abyss of bias and polarization? I have a few thoughts, grounded in both common sense, I would hope, and some of the expert commentary that's out there. First is to re-emphasize medical ethics and neutrality, and do it loudly. The leadership in medicine, from med schools to hospital administrators to professional bodies, they need to actively reaffirm the core ethical duty to treat all patients without discrimination. It's not enough to have it written in a code of ethics that nobody reads. It needs to be said in speeches, in trainings, in workplace culture daily. Professional organizations like the American Medical Association have thankfully clarified the stance. Doctors should not refuse care based on vaccination status, and patients have a right to treatment regardless of their choices. That message needs amplification. Hospitals might consider putting up signs in waiting rooms saying, "We provide care based on need, not creed or compliance." Let patients know you're safe from judgment when you come in. And let staff know that too. Let them know, yes, we understand you might be frustrated, but your obligation is to care, period. Maybe we even need refreshers or continue education on medical ethics in the new context of daily challenges. The key is making neutrality cool again, making compassion for all patients the expected norm. Second, let's combat compassion fatigue with support, not scapegoating. Healthcare workers are suffering from burnout and compassion fatigue, and they need our help and empathy too. Hospitals should provide outlets for staff to express frustrations safely. That means support groups, counseling, adequate time off. And when a nurse says, "Hey, I just can't feel sorry for those unvaccinated folks anymore," don't condemn, help her process and find perspective. Remember her and yourself that anger is a natural sign of burnout, not a license to abandon ethics, however. So nursing leaders and chief physicians should encourage their teams to fight compassion fatigue as a new battle. One bioethics essay emphasized that health leaders must combat compassion fatigue to ensure that needs of all patients are met. That means consciously cultivating empathy, even when it's hard. Share stories of when a patient everyone was mad at turned out to have a change of heart or was grateful for care. Positive reinforcement that caring is worth it. Essentially, we need to rekindle that humanitarian spirit in medicine that COVID-19 storm clearly blew out. Third, encourage diversity, but diversity of thought in medicine. And this might sound unrelated to patient care, but it's absolutely crucial because we need healthcare to be a place where differing views can and should be openly discussed without fear of cancellation. That means in med schools, in conferences, folks like Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Malone should not be treated as heretics, but rather engaged with. If someone has data or an opinion that challenges this consensus, let's hear it and debate it openly. And by doing so, we internalize a culture that it's okay to disagree, and that culture trickles down to tolerance and patients who disagree. If every doctor is trained that only one viewpoint is acceptable, then naturally, those doctors might be intolerant of patients who also stray from that viewpoint. But if doctors are used to intellectual diversity amongst their colleagues, they're absolutely more likely to accept diversity of choices amongst their patients. In practice, this could and should mean inviting in contrarian voices and encouraging an open and respectable debate. We need to eliminate the demonization of dissent. A healthy scientific community corrects errors through debate, not silencing. And the result is better care for patients. Number 4, policy safeguards to protect patients' rights. It's unfortunate we even have to consider this, but maybe we do. Laws or regulations to reinforce that patients cannot be denied necessary care based on arbitrary criteria like vaccination status or political beliefs. Some states have started doing this already. In Texas, for example, a new law, House Bill 44, was passed to ban healthcare providers from refusing to treat patients in state-funded programs like Medicaid or CHIP, just because they aren't vaccinated. Essentially, Texas drew a line saying if you're a doctor taking care of vulnerable populations, you can't have a no unvaccinated patients policy. Now, that law faced pushback from medical associations who felt it, quote, interfered with their autonomy. But the fact such a law was even needed shows how much of a very real problem this has become. And I'm not usually one to invite more government into medicine. You guys know that, but maybe clear rules are needed to prevent the worst abuses. I mean, truly, this would be government absolutely playing the role of referee. And at minimum, hospital systems could implement internal policies. So for example, any ER or urgent care must treat all patients regardless of their vaccination status. And perhaps elective offices and clinics that want to dismiss patients for non-compliance should have to provide a referral to another willing provider, something to ensure that patients just aren't left out in the cold. And how about that transplant issue? We saw cases where patients were denied organ transplants if they refused a COVID jab. That is not just a gray area ethically. I mean, transplant teams often do require many health assurances. I get that. But this is the extreme. I mean, one man in Boston was taken off a heart transplant list for being unjabbed during COVID, and it made national news. Some places required even 6-month-old infants to have COVID jabs to remain on any transplant lists, which, I mean, I know many found this excessive who didn't find this excessive. This is the comply or die, literally, mindset. No vaccine, no life-saving organ donations. States might want to consider regulations to balance this, ensuring medical necessity and no, it's not libertarian, but states might consider regulations here to balance this, to ensure that medical necessity and individualized judgment override blanket compliance rules for transplants or other critical care. And we have to guard against the slippery slope of medicine becoming a reward for good behavior. It should and always remain a response to medical need. Number 5, rebuild patient trust, especially across the political divide. And this one's on all of us, but especially on healthcare providers. We need to let patients know they are here to help you, not judge you. Doctors might need to explicitly say in appointments, hey, my role isn't to scold you for not getting vaccinated or not taking your meds or whatever. My role is to help you from here forward. Let's work together. A little humility goes a very long way. Public health communicators should avoid patronizing or vilifying language. So instead of blame the vaccinated, how about let's reach out to communities that felt alienated and actually have real dialogue. Perhaps have forums where conservative or vaccine hesitant community members can voice their concerns openly to healthcare providers in a respectful setting, a two-way dialogue. And hey, maybe the dialogue will actually turn into people's minds being changed. When people feel heard, they're more likely to trust. And remember, trust was lost when people felt lied to because they were, or judged because they were. So to rebuild it, we have to be truthful. Even if the truth is complex or evolving, You got to be respectful. You have to be truthful. Don't hide uncertainties or dismiss questions as stupid. If a significant portion of the population thinks that the health establishment doesn't have their best interests at heart, you have an obligation to address that head on. So that means acknowledging past mistakes like overhyping some things or officials breaking their own rules, which undermine trust, and sincerely committing to apolitical, patient-first conduct. And over time, as folks see their doctor consistently treating them with dignity and respect, even if they happen to disagree on something, trust will regrow. Number 6, support healthcare heroes who stand up for principles. Just as we call out the bad actors, let's lift up the good ones. There are so many out there, Shauna included, where nurses and doctors who privately grumble that this isn't right when they see the bias against patients start to speak out. They might fear speaking up, but we should create an environment where they feel safe to say, hey, team, that Facebook post about letting anti-vaxxer patients suffer, yeah, no, not cool. That's not who we are. See, those who defend universal care and compassion should be applauded, not ostracized. Leaders in medicine should publicly commend staff who go above and beyond and go that extra mile to care for difficult patients, like those who refuse advice but still need help. Positive reinforcement can shift culture. And outside of hospitals, support organizations and voices that are pushing back on this trend. I mentioned Dr. Goldfarb's Do No Harm group. They're trying to keep ideology from corrupting medicine, and that aligns with what we're talking about here as our number one goal. Also, many of the doctors who were punished for speaking out, like Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Malone, Dr. McCullough, etc., they have since found large public audiences or positions in the government and a lot of support from patients who appreciate their courage. These doctors often say, yeah, they just want to return to medicine or return to open inquiry and individualized care. And we should listen to them and incorporate their experiences to ensure that mistakes of this pandemic and censorship and bias are not repeated. And number 7, heal the healer-patient relationship. Finally, and most broadly, we need to heal the divide between healthcare providers and a very large chunk of the public. This is almost like a relationship in need of counseling. Both sides need to extend a hand. Patients who have grown suspicious, give your doctor a chance. Realize that most healthcare workers do have your best interests in mind, even if a few loud ones on Twitter or Facebook say dumb things. And doctors, please realize that a patient's mistrust or non-compliance often comes from fear or past experiences, not from a desire to make your life hard. We have to restore empathy in both directions. If we succeed, we won't have to worry about compliance as much because people will trust advice more and doctors will be more understanding when it's not followed perfectly. This is not a quick fix. I know that. Human nature and societal wounds take time to mend, but the alternative, continuing down this road of division, is unacceptable. We risk undoing decades of progress in patient rights and evidence-based trust if we let comply or die attitudes fester. So, as we wrap up, let's remind ourselves what's at stake here. Because it's not just an argument on vaccines or politics. It's about the soul of healthcare. It's about whether the medical profession will continue to uphold its sacred duty to care for anyone who walks through its doors, or whether it will allow bitter tribalism and self-righteousness to corrupt that duty. Shauna's fear, that comply or die mindset, might be here to stay, is a fear that we must take seriously, but it's also a call to action. We can turn this around. And the fact that we're having this conversation means that there are people in the field and outside of it who recognize the problem and care enough to fight for change. We've shone a light on the problem. Doctors refusing patients for noncompliance, colleagues cheering on the mistreatment of those with differing beliefs, trust in doctors splintering along political lines, and a chilling environment for any medical professional who doesn't go with the flow. We've backed it up with data and real examples like that Dr. Valentine in Alabama example. We've called out the hypocrisy, noting that no other patient group gets treated this way, and it's pure nonsense to start now. And importantly, we've laid out a roadmap, or at least the beginnings of one, for real solutions. Reaffirm ethics, support burned out staff, welcome open debate, enact safeguards, and rebuild trust. And then, of course, celebrate those who refuse to give in to this ugly trend. To the average person listening, especially if you're someone who feels caught in the middle of this very weird post-truth world that we're in right now, here's my message to you. You have the right to medical care without ideological strings attached. If you ever feel you're being judged or refused because of a personal choice or belief, speak up. Most healthcare workers really do want to help you, and sometimes a frank conversation can clear the air. And don't lose faith that there are good people in medicine. Shauna is proof. She's a phenomenal human being. And so are countless others who are quietly out there doing the right thing every day. Demand accountability from the other healthcare institutions. They serve you, the patient, and you have every right to expect unbiased care. To the healthcare professionals out there, I know the last few years have been the hardest of many of your lives. And I know that some of you are running on fumes emotionally, but I ask you, I implore you, please remember your oath and remember the mission. Don't let the worst aspects of the pandemic response tarnish your compassion. Your patients need that now from you more than ever. We can't treat illness with hatred, and we can't mend broken bodies by breaking trust. As one bioethicist reminded us, recognizing the equal value of all people is essential to a moral society. And I would say also essential to good healthcare. So let's reject the comply or die mindset, and let's replace it with care and heal. Let's restore the notion that a patient is a patient deserving care, regardless if they're vaccinated or unvaccinated, left or right, prudent or foolish. But by doing so, we don't just save the patients, we just might save the profession of medicine from losing its way. All right, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. If you got some value from today's chat, well, do me a favor, go ahead and give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Facebook, X, or Instagram. As for The Brian Nichols Show, you can find it on all your favorite podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you consume your podcasting content. Hit subscribe, and of course, we have over 1,000 other episodes that will leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. As for the video version of The Brian Nichols Show, you can check us out over on your favorite video platforms like Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. And of course, if you head over to those respective platforms, hit that subscribe button and little notification bell, because at 9 p.m. Eastern on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, we do a live stream over on X, on Facebook, over on YouTube, and Rumble. So one more time, Monday, Thursdays, and Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern. With that being said, folks, one final ask. If you enjoy the show and you want to support the show, you can support us by either doing a one-time donation over at briannicholsshow.com, or you can support the folks who support us, like our sponsors, such as the amazing studio sponsors we have here, Cardio Miracle. If you want to go ahead and check out Cardio Miracle, head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, or if you've been watching today's show, go ahead and scan that little QR code over my shoulder. Either way, you'll see on your page, you're shopping with Brian Nichols. With that being said, thanks for joining today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. This is Brian Nichols signing off. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.